Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyun. Following a brief martial law declaration last week, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol issued a televised public apology, expressing regret for causing public concern and pledging not to attempt another such declaration. He also announced he would delegate governance to the ruling People's Power Party and the government, drawing strong criticism from opposition lawmakers who questioned the plan's constitutional legitimacy. Now, following this, lawmakers brought an impeachment motion to the National Assembly, but it was blocked due to a lack of quorum as nearly all ruling party members boycotted the vote. The opposition Democratic Party has vowed to try again. Meanwhile, the Justice Ministry has imposed a travel ban on Yoon, pending an investigation into charges of treason and other offenses. As South Korea grapples with political turmoil, the question remains, who will lead the country in the wake of the martial law crisis? For more on this, we are joined by Choi Hyun-sun, professor at Myeongji University's Department of Public Administration. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Lee Hyun, Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School. Thank you for coming in, Professor.
It's great to be with you.
So let's first start with Professor Choi. Now, over the weekend, like I've mentioned, the impeachment motion against President Yoon failed due to a lack of quorum, as the majority of the ruling party members were absent. First, could you walk us through the requirements for the impeachment motion to be passed?
Today, I can see that many people look so tired. This is a national emergency. Most of people maybe cannot help watching the news, updated news. It's a really big national crisis in Korea. For the impeachment, the presidency impeachment motion needs a two-thirds majority vote by a National Assembly. We have a single chamber system, so two-thirds of the majority vote should be for the pass. So I think the last Saturday there was only like less than 200 people, which means our National Assembly has 300 members, which means there is no quorum. Also, same time, if the impeachment is passed, there is more than 200 votes among the 300 members.
Right, so we lacked the number of votes for the president to be impeached. Now, before the vote on the impeachment motion, President Yoon made a public address stating that he would delegate the management of state affairs to the ruling PPP party. Now, in legal terms, Professor Lee, is this allowed? And can the president voluntarily delegate such powers to a party? Could you tell us on the conditions that should be met to appoint an acting president?
Right. At this point, it's really unclear because there's no clear precedent on this kind of situation, as well as, the Korean Constitution itself is silent on the issue with respect to whether a sort of voluntary transfer of power can be made from a president to a prime minister. But to date, we've only had 9 acting presidents as provided for within the Constitution. And in the Constitution itself, Article 71 states that if the office of the president is vacant or if the president is unable to perform his functions, then the prime minister can essentially act as president. And that's the constitutional provision. So as you're seeing this being played out on the political sphere, there are 2 views on this matter. So one view, of course, is from the Democratic Party, is that the suspension of presidential duties can only happen when there's an impeachment or resignation or death of a president. In this case, we don't have any of those situations. And so therefore, they would argue constitutionally, you can't have sort of an acting president in the prime minister under these conditions. But on the other side of it, if you're the ruling party, and they've made this point, I think, is that the Constitution is silent on the matter of what circumstances would allow for an acting president, in this case the prime minister, to take control of state affairs. Because the Constitution itself doesn't say necessarily there has to be resignation or there has to be an impeachment in order for the prime minister to take over. It only says that if the president is unable to perform his duties. And so from that interpretation of the Constitution, you could argue that the prime minister has the authority. So at this point, really, since there's no precedent on this, there's why this is the back and forth between the both parties on this issue, and it's going to be played out for probably the weeks to come.
Right, so the parties are divided on how to understand the president being unable to perform his duties. Now, on December 8th, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and PPP leader Han Dong-hoon delivered a national address to discuss measures to stabilize the political situation in the country. President Yoon stated that he would not be involved in state affairs, including foreign diplomacy. Professor Che, what kind of ways are being discussed to manage state affairs moving forward?
I think the Prime Minister Han and the leader of PPT, Han, also they are arguing maybe we can do President orderly resignation, but that orderly resignation may not fit or conform with our constitution. So maybe there are many legal issues, but they are arguing maybe we can do a responsible prime minister system, which we had experienced under the Kim Dae-jung President Kim Dae-jung. So the Prime Minister Kim Jong-pil had many powers, the authorities, and he managed the country under the President Kim Dae-jung. So I think that we have some experience of a responsible prime minister system, but however, still there is no maybe not possible because of legal issue, because of the Prime Minister Han is appointed by the President Yoon. At the same time, national unity government system they might think, but this is also we don't have experience, and this is a broad coalitions government, which means there is a big communication issue, how can make a partnership issue with maybe Democratic Party and other parties and other social entities. But I never saw maybe PPP, the People's Power Party, communicate with the Democratic Party well or other social entities in our country. So I think there was no communication at all. So I think that even though Prime Minister and the leader of the PPP argue about those options, but I don't think it work in this situation.
Right, there are lots of options on the table, but it's a first for all of us here. Now, then, Professor Lee, is it constitutionally feasible to implement what our Professor Chen mentioned, a national unity government or a system where the Prime Minister holds executive power?
Well, the whole point about executive power itself, of course, is because the Constitution mentions this. Article 71 is the applicable provision here, and there the Prime Minister is authorized to take control if the president is unable to fulfill his duties. And as Professor Chen mentioned, the difficulties politically in terms of the two parties here unable to agree and probably not willing to really negotiate with each other on the idea of a national unity government. So if that's the case, if there's no political consensus, the legal position here is you have to have an acting president. And the acting president effectively assumes all powers of the president, assuming you invoke Article 71, and therefore the president has all the duties and responsibilities and rights that the president has. For example, the right to ratify treaties, to command the armed forces, appoint state council members, ministers, dismiss public officials. So in that context, the prime minister can act as president. But given the fact that this circumstance is so unusual and unprecedented, there's really no precedent for this. And therefore, this is kind of like the Korean government and the Korean political situation trying to figure it as it goes. And I think in this case, the political winds will certainly probably affect the process by which the ruling party and the prime minister go forward on this particular this question, because academically speaking, there's a lot of debate as to the kind of powers the acting president can have. In this case, the ruling party working in concert with the prime minister. Again, there's no example of this in Korean history. Therefore, this is the reason why this is such a hot button issue among the political parties themselves. And I think people who are watching the political scene are very, very careful watching what's going to happen in the weeks and months ahead.
Right, and speaking of the power of the President Yoon has suspended his duties, but lately he accepted the resignation of the Ministry of Interior and Safety, Lee Sang-min, and Han Dong-hoon of the ruling party claims this is not considered an exercise of his duties. But Professor Chek, can the acceptance of the resignation be seen as an exercise of the president's personal authority?
Yes, it is clearly an exercise over his duties. I don't think President resign his job at all, because he clearly appointed some of the important positions, and he accept the resignation, which is really big authority, because personnel is a really big authority in the public system. So he appointed, which means he never resign his job at all. So which means the Han Dong-hoon and the Prime Minister Han says maybe President never show up this authority or this government duties, but he is. So I think this is a critical point. What Prime Minister and Han Dong-hoon said is really not true, because the president himself is he is still alive.
Right, so it was a show of his power. Now, as our Professor Chen mentioned a while ago, there are various options on the table as to who will lead the next state affairs. Professor Lee, what kind of legal procedures are needed to be followed to ensure that the transition of powers is lawful and transparent at the same time?
Well, because there's no example of this in Korean history, it's really uncharted territory, because in order to have a transition of power, normally you would have in this situation, either you'd have an impeachment, you'd have a resignation, or you'd have a temporary transfer of power in the case, let's say, the president was to undergo a medical procedure. There would be clearly a situation where there would be a very clear, transparent transfer of power. But because of the situation now where the ruling party and the prime minister have really given no timelines in terms of an eventual resignation, this sort of amorphous sort of period, this period of time where we expect the president at some point may resign. There's been no indication that he himself said that he will resign. Because you have a situation where now you have an in-between period, at that point, it doesn't become very transparent, because as a constitutional issue, as a legal matter, there's the anticipation that any transfer of power would happen between the president and a prime minister due to some limited period of time when the transfer would be clearly needed. Example, in this case, let's say an impeachment or resignation. So in the event that there is this period where we don't know exactly what's going to happen, that's causing the confusion here. And I think that's why people are very nervous at some level, and also because it's not transparent insofar as what's been talked about between the ruling party, the prime minister, and the president. No one knows exactly the timeline here, and therefore, the transition itself needs to, I think, from the president's side as well as the prime minister's side, is to be clearly indicated in terms of what they intend with respect to this transfer of power and how it's going to be done. So at this point, it's not very transparent.
Right, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Now, amid the situation, there are voices calling for the Constitution to be amended. Professor Lee, what is the process to amend the Constitution regarding the president's term? And, even if such an amendment is made, is there a legal dispute? There's legal dispute over whether it would apply to the current sitting president. What are the legal considerations in this case?
Absolutely. I mean, the Constitution itself provides a term limit of 5 years, a single term for the president. And that's Article 70. In order for a constitutional amendment to actually to occur, it requires very special procedures, that's different from regular legislation, right? So you'd have to have a majority of the National Assembly submit a proposal for amendment. That amendment needs not only concurrence from the National Assembly, but also a national referendum as well. And so in this case, that's going to require the voters themselves to actually vote on the referendum. And so in that case, it will take quite a bit of time. But even assuming the referendum actually happens and an amendment is in place, the question about whether this could apply to President Yoon is an open question, because this would be necessarily an ex post facto application of the amendment. So insofar as a new law has been put in place, President Yoon was elected under the original terms of the Constitution. So if you had an amendment and now retroactively apply that to President Yoon, it seems somewhat unlikely in that sense in terms of this ex post facto application. So I think in that case, there's many more legal questions that would arise with respect to a referendum on limiting the term below 5 years and then applying it to President Yoon.
Now, meanwhile, the Democratic Party is opposing the ruling party's plan for an early resignation of President Yoon and has vowed to reintroduce the impeachment motion until it succeeds. So, Professor Che, is this possible under the National Assembly law to continuously, put forward the same impeachment motion over and over again?
Yes, it is possible, but as Professor Lee explained, this is we never experienced this first time. So still there is no a good interpretation of our constitution about this procedure. So I think now it is possible they continuously process about this impeachment. But the problem here is a strong so I think the conflict between the two parties. By accident, today I wear the blue shirt and Professor Lee wear the red shirt, which is red PPP, and then the blue Democratic Party is they never get along about this issue, because it's certainly maybe Democratic Party want very fast process, very fast, and maybe only the president election would be more beneficial for their party, and probably now the leader of the Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, will be maybe strong candidate about this issue. But PPP is not prepared well about this issue. There is no strong candidate, so they want maybe slow process for the president election. So there is no way two parties get agree about any issues. But right now, Democratic Party has a majority and they have enough number of the members. So I think that they continuously try the impeachment.
So there's no legal limitations on that part. Now, in addition to this, the Special Investigation Unit of the Prosecutor's Office has placed President Yoon under investigation as a suspect for treason, and the Justice Ministry today issued a travel ban on Yoon. Professor Lee, how far can the investigation into the president go, and what are the key issues in the investigation?
We're really in a dramatic legal situation here when it comes to the president, because normally the president would, of course, have criminal immunity from prosecution, and that is provided for in the Constitution. Article 84 says that the president is immune from criminal prosecution, but for if you have a situation where you're involved in insurrection or treason, and that's exactly what many people are calling for the president to be convicted of or prosecuted for. So in this case, the criminal prosecution can move forward if a legitimate charge of insurrection or treason can be made. And so this is governed by the Criminal Act of Korea in Article 87, which clearly lays out what the standards are for charging someone for insurrection. And that can include everyone, including the president of the country. So in this case, then, the president can be investigated can be charged with and convicted of insurrection, and eventually, if he's convicted, face the punishment, which is very, very severe. And so the irony, of course, in all of this is President Yoon formerly was the supreme prosecutor of the country. And he, in fact, was involved in prosecutions of various political leaders, including, as you know, the impeachment of President Park. So, I mean, it's just the irony cannot just be, I think, overstated here, because President Yoon knows the whole process himself, because being involved as a prosecutor at the highest levels. And in this case, this prosecution can move forward. And the people that he knew in the prosecutorial office are the same people now are going to be pursuing this case against him. So I think that's another subtext here of the story, is that the people that he served with and who are under him are now in charge of prosecuting him.
Right, and given this unprecedented situation where we're left with a leadership vacancy, Professor Che, what kind of measures could be taken to minimize the leadership vacancies at this time?
Yeah, I think this is an important issue. I think the only option we can have is maybe vice minister system. So I think the prime minister and the many cabinet members, they are involved in the martial law, the issue. They were in the middle of the session, and they passed the martial law. So I think most of them will be investigated very soon. So I think the next 3 to 6 months, at least, maybe the vice minister instead of the minister or the prime ministers, they must take over some of the authority, and then they can manage some part to our country, our government. This is maybe the only way, because I think the prime minister has no maybe any qualification right now, because under the investigation, he is in charge, and he can talk about the vacancy of the leadership. This is nonsense. Maybe many other countries will watch over our country, and then the maybe economy and the national security is all in trouble. So I think the only way we can survive this crisis, probably who are involved in this bad martial law, they step down, and then they don't have no authority, and then maybe vice ministers of our government, they can just manage the government in the 3 to 6 month period, and then we must have a president election to take over the next step.
Right, so we'll have to see how the government navigates the current situation moving forward, but we'll have to leave our discussion right here. Many thanks to Professor Lee and Professor Che for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Now that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.